Action. Good afternoon and welcome to the Administration, Finance, Recreation, and Parks, Public Safety, and Public Works Committee meeting for February 11th, 2020. The purpose of the committee meetings are for the city departments to pass along information to the city council and discuss initiatives listed on the published agenda. By ordinance, the committee consists of the mayor, members of the city council, and the city administrator. The ordinance mandates the city administrator as the chair of the committee meetings. By ordinance, the committee makes no formal decisions on committee matters. Rather, items are voted to move forward to a mayor and council meeting for consideration of vote, or staff receive guidance from the committee regarding the matter. This is a public meeting, but not a public hearing. Therefore, while the meeting is open to the public, we do not take public comments or questions during the committee meetings. Public comments or questions are received at the regular city council meetings held at 7 p.m. in the city council chambers on the second and fourth Monday of each month. The first item on today's agenda, and we're going to start with the Public Safety and Public Works Committee. First item on today's agenda is the approval of the minutes for the Public Safety, Public Works Committee meeting for January 14th, 2020. Is there a motion? Motion approved by Councilmember Hall. Is there a second? I'm sorry, Councilmember Wilsey. I'll get it right one of these days. Second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. Any further questions or comments? All in favor, please raise your hands. It's unanimous. Thank you. No public safety items under fire, no public safety items for police. Moving on to Public Works. Number 2, consideration of a resolution for approval to submit an application for a 319 subsection H fiscal year 2020 grant in the amount of $150,000 from the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. Mr. Skalsky.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So the 319H grant program is one that we have pursued and been selected for in the past. So this is the same program that funded the Myrtle Zion paver project, and it's generally oriented around water quality improvement projects. We have a project that we think will fit well with this that'll be right out here in City Hall's parking lot or general vicinity. And we're requesting a $150,000 grant with a 50% match from city funds that would be half from our stormwater utility and half from the green infrastructure fund that was set up for this purpose with shared stormwater revenues. And we'll come back to you with the specifics of what that program is if we're selected for the grant program.
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Councilmember Judy. Second.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Wilson. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. It's unanimous. Thank you. Item number 3, consideration for the mayor and/or city administrator to award a contract to standby contractor Federal EC for the 10320 Amberside Court Pipe Rehabilitation Project in the amount of $111,570. Mr. Skalsky.
So this is a straightforward lining project, and it's one of the projects that, especially with the weather we've been having lately, reminds us that we need to get out there and do these before we have a sinkhole or other problems related to deterioration of a large pipe. This is being awarded to one of our standby contractors who is the low bidder. We actually received 3 quotes, and Federal EC was the lowest, and they've been doing good work for us, so we're hoping that this will go the same way. Any questions? I'll be happy to address them.
Floor is open.
Motion approved.
Motion approved by Councilmember Tizer. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Dan, did you have another thing on
Just
that?
one comment on that. I neglected to include the quote in your package, and that was my choice. It'll be in the vote package when it comes. That was a mistake.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, consideration for the mayor and/or city administrator to award a contract to standby contractor Chatfield Contract Incorporated for the 235 Corinth Court Pipe Lining Project in the amount of $164,835. Mr. Skalsky.
Similar story with a different address. So we're lining a pipe in Corinth Court. And this is another one of our standby contractors. We have 2 that do most of the lining, and this is Chatfield. This is also the low bidder, and I'll be happy to address any questions you may have.
Floor is open.
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Councilmember Wilsey. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by the mayor. Any further questions or comments? All in favor, please raise your hands. It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Yes.
Picture of efficiency.
I have no such skills.
Okay, moving on to the Administration, Finance, Recreation, and Parks Committee meeting for February 11th, 2020. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the Administration, Finance, and and Recreation and Parks Committee meeting for January 14, 2020. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve minutes.
Motion approved by Councilmember Tizer. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. Any questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. It's unanimous, thank you. Moving on to item number 2 under administration, discussion of a policy regulating the use of city resources for non-city sponsored events. This one, we had a request from a council member to have a public meeting. I'm not sure exactly, I didn't get a whole lot of information, but it kind of sparked the conversation internally on when can we or should we call public meetings on behalf of a councilman. So it begs a couple questions in this analysis. And before I dive headfirst into this and try to work on a policy, I wanted to find out where y'all were at on this and make sure I'm tracking in the right direction. So basically, the issue is we have a request, not from the governing body, to have a public meeting utilizing public resources, public tax dollars, staff time, facilities, but it's not a sanctioned city event. So there's, some implications that come into that. We obviously don't have a very strong policies around this, and with regard to our financial policies, we really need to have some strong policies when it comes to our public finance expenditures. So again, just wanted to put this out there, find out where y'all were at, and just open the floor up for any discussion on this.
Do we know how, excuse me. Pick one of us.
Please.
Do we know how others, rather than try and reinvent this wheel, can we find out how other cities handle this and perhaps pattern after that?
Well, I can tell you in my
I don't know the answer, so I'm wide open to whatever happens.
In my experience, the city would have a policy around that's going to regulate how the governing body is going to use city resources. And a lot of that the power resides in the governing body, whether or not you want to let a council member have a meeting on behalf of the city utilizing city resources. Now, right now, the charter doesn't allow that. So, we're kind of stuck in this situation where, yes, we want to promote having the public meetings, and we want to encourage the transparency, and we want to engage our residents, but at the same time, when we have 7 elected officials, it makes it difficult for us to decide where are we going to spend those resources. And it kind of loops in the conversations with council too. We don't really have a policy around that, but we understand that there's a need there for the council to engage its constituents and in our community. So we want to find that balance, but we just don't know where to go on this one because we don't have a policy around it. My recommendation is that you allow me and the legal office to develop a policy, the framework, and come back and we work on it iteratively and come up with something we all can agree on, and that's going to meet the best practices in finance policies. So we're not just spending money recklessly and not really putting any methodology behind it.
Well, let me just go back to basics. And a single council member does not have the authority to direct staff in any way, shape, or form. So if a single council member wants to direct city resources for a public meeting, it needs to be a vote of council. It can't be a single council member. But going back to the policy, I really think the council needs to have a policy. This doesn't apply to me, so I am interjecting myself into this. But I think that, like I said, a single member of council does not have the authority to direct staff. So if a single member of council wants to have a town hall meeting, a conversations with a council member, whatever the case may be, it needs to be decided in committee by council before that goes forward. And having said that, and I don't think this is the appropriate place for this discussion, but since Gary brought it up, I've told you all before, I pay for the coffees with the mayor personally because I'm afraid that that's in a gray area where someone might misconstrue it as being campaigning or whatever. Now, that is just my personal policy. I pay for that myself. Those are not paid by tax dollars. So I think that all of this should be considered by council, because we could end up in a situation where we've got 6 council members having 12 town hall meetings a year. Each council member, let's say, has every 6 months. Now then, having said that, any council member can rent a room at East Roswell Area Park. Any council member can talk to RUMC and get the community room there. Any council member can reach out to have a town hall meeting that it doesn't involve city resources. But where I'm concerned is, if we have the full weight of the city behind a town hall meeting, we're not just talking about renting a room. We're talking about all of those people back there that have to be in attendance. And that's a greater strain on our staff. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but I'm just saying we need a policy. Plain and simple.
So if the consensus is, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I would support having you and David develop a policy. One suggestion that I might have is if there is an issue that council members feel that a town hall needs to be held about, that possibly the way to handle that is to let the professional staff hold that meeting, because they are coming with information and research, and they can bring it, bring what's needed into the meeting, rather than having it be held by a specific council member.
Councilmember Hall.
I may have been the one, and I think another council member requested a town hall, but I know I was speaking with Julie as I was doing my meet and greets, and I was also interested in doing something that probably is specific to my interest and constituents that I talked to in my campaign. I guess that a policy, I think the council should develop a policy, or what we should have a discussion as to what we feel could be a policy. As far as what I would like to see, I would like to be able to use city facilities. I understand that, speaking to Mr. Leatherman, that we could rent the room for $40 an hour at the Johnson room in the Johnson. So if it's a matter of council members having to pay $80 for a 2-hour rental, we can make that happen. In my opinion, I think that city resources should be, like a room should be available to us, but I don't have a problem paying $80 for a room if that's what I need. But I don't want somebody else from city staff or anybody else dictating what I can have a meeting about or directing me on a meeting if I want to have a meeting with the public about an issue that's important or people have shared with me. I want to be really careful in that area.
Thank you. So, I'm a big advocate of an open, transparent, inclusive, engaging, and responsive government. So that is an item that I'm very, very passionate about. I don't want, like Council Member Hall said, that city staff take over elected officials. So just, some definitions like town hall meetings have served as means of public communication between groups since the early colonial era in New England. Traditionally, these town halls were public meetings or even conducted to open dialogue between town officials and citizens. So town hall forums are a way for local and national politicians to meet with their constituents, either to hear from them on topics of interest or to discuss specific upcoming legislation or regulation. During periods of active political debate, town halls can be a locus for protest and more active debate, so which means public engagement. In the United States, town halls are a common way for national politicians to connect or reconnect with their constituents during recess when they are in their home district away from Washington, D.C., which means they want to keep engaging with their constituents, which also local politicians should do exactly the same. So saying that, I would like to know the definition of governing body.
City council.
Okay. So, what is the budget for conversation with council? Okay.
I do. There is an account currently, it's hospital.
I'm following my own rules.
Right back at you.
It comes from the hospitality and events budget under elected officials account.
Do you know how much is in there? I think that's the money we budget overall for the preparation of the council meetings. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Stuff like that.
Food, things like that, yes. So that is encompassed in both events and the food that's provided here for.
So we don't have a defined line item for conversations with the council. That's what I'm getting at. I think we need, if we're going to do this, we need to craft a policy around it and build it into the budget so everybody knows what we're doing and knows where the money's coming from. And right now, it's being drawn from a larger pot, so it's, I think we have an interest to make sure that we're doing things the right way.
I think there's a difference in what we're discussing, the conversations with council versus a pop-up town hall. Maybe Mr. Tizer wants to have a pop-up town hall, or Mr. Judy, or Councilmember Woolsey. I'm sorry, Councilmember.
I think this is pretty easy. I don't think anybody's debating not having town halls or not doing anything like that. It's where do we fund it out of, and what's the process to get it done? That's all we're saying.
What staff is involved?
Yeah, and what staff is involved, and the security, is there not security, what is there? And so
We had this issue in 2017, and, it wasn't handled then, so I would like to handle it now, so we're not.
I don't think anybody's debating town halls or no town halls or anything. It's just how do we handle it within the budget, and then, if we take conversation, council, make an alignment, we just figure it out. Nobody's debating
Nothing's going to change. Let me come back with, I'll come back with sample other cities, what they're doing, and then we'll put the bones together for a policy, and then we'll just figure out, we'll fill in the blanks.
And I would just echo what Councilmember Hall said. There's a difference between a situation where we're all at and a situation where one of us is at. And
Well, wait a minute, we're not all at.
all invited to be at.
All
right?
is not invited to be at.
Is there something you're trying to say?
I'm not invited to conversations with council.
Sure you are.
So, and there is a public perception that I'm not attending those because I'm snubbing my nose at the citizens of Roswell. And that is not the case.
No, it's my impression you were invited, and from my standpoint, I'd love to have you there. Love to have you there. So, but to me, there's a difference between when it's that kind of a situation versus one of us having a constituent meeting. And I think any policy should kind of address that. I don't know what the answer is. I'm just suggesting that that
We'll address all
we
that.
address that kind of a thing.
We'll define it, we'll address it, we'll try to capture what we can, but I think everybody needs to be included in that conversation and developing the policy. So we'll bring if you're okay with it, we'll bring the bones of that policy back. Some examples of what other cities do, and then we can decide on how we want to move forward.
Thank you.
I agree. I was just going to add to that, maybe to that policy would be added that all elected officials are invited to attend, so there would be an announcement that there might be a quorum of mayor and council.
You might want to have
Individual town.
your own, and that's
Right.
fine.
Right.
Councilmember Sabata.
Thank you. I will continue with my line of thought. So then you said that there's a fund called hospitality and
Yes, the fund's called, I can actually give you the exact, because I just pulled it up.
do you know how much is in the budget every year or
Yes.
annual budget?
Well, I think Ryan can speak better into this, but as far as I know about this particular account, it's an average of, I think, 10,000.
Okay. And this is only for council or any elected official, this fund?
It is under our elected officials account. That means all of you. That's what I have been told. Yes, thank you, Ryan.
And it's hospitality and,
It is under the governing body account.
and then I see, okay, while you're looking for this full name, there was 3 questions here on the packet, on page number 9 of the packet. So does the council outside of approval from the governing body, which is elected officials, have the authority to call a public meeting? For me, the answer is yes. Any elected official can call for a public meeting to engage with the people of Roswell.
These are questions we would answer
Oh, that's-
in our analysis.
Okay, so, but since they're here, I would like to answer myself too. So since they are already here, does a council member outside of approval from the governing body have the authority to expand public funds that were public funds that were not allocated in the approved budget? So we are talking about there is a budget that we have access to events. I don't know, we have maybe need to define better the usage of this budget, the fund of this budget. So this means that we need to see about the fund and see if this allowed to be used for town hall or any other kind of meetings to engage with the public. Does a council member outside of approval from the governing body have the authority to utilize city facilities, staff, resources? City facilities, I think I have no doubt that anybody can use city facilities in different aspects, either paying or not paying, depends, or what is allowed. Staff, yeah, that is the available. And resources, we need to define resources, what we mean for that. So, so definitely, I'm in support of regulating this, but without going over the responsibilities and what the elected officials were elected to do the job for. If this interferes with the job of elected officials, I will not support any regulation from staff that will prevent elected officials to do the job that they were elected for. So, saying that, I want to hear more from my colleagues.
Gary, staff cannot create any policy without the approval of council, correct?
Not a policy that's going to affect the city council, no.
Correct. So that will not be the case. So staff's not going to create something that affects the elected officials' ability to govern.
Right. I mean, whatever policy we come up with, you guys are going to have to approve.
Great clarification.
But I'm just, these are questions in my mind that we need to answer as we're going through this exercise. So if everybody's cool with that, I'll come back to this committee with that policy, and we can continue working on it. Moving on to item number 3 under administration, discussion of policy regulating requests for action information from city departments. This is kind of related. We don't have a policy on this. And this kind of ebbs and flows throughout the year. And this past year actually hasn't had, we've been busy constantly. And on top of just the regular day-to-day, we do get a lot of service requests from the public and from the city council, and we handle those as best we can. And I think we do a good job of getting responses back timely. Sometimes we'll get requests from a council member that will take more than 15, 20 minutes for someone to sit down and put together. We've got a couple requests right now that are multiple hours to put this stuff together, so I thought it'd be appropriate to bring this to you all in this committee. And again, for my recommendation, you charge myself and the legal office to come back with the bones of a policy that will help us address and regulate this activity. But basically, we're getting paralyzed with information requests from some of the council members, and I want to put some guardrails on this so our staff just isn't buried in information requests that are just taking up a lot of time. So with that, I'll open the floor for discussion.
Thank you. Again, very related to the previous one. And again, being a big advocate of open, transparent, inclusive, engaging, responsive city government, the flow of information is critical. And if elected officials require an information, it's because they have to take very, very, very careful of how we're going to regulate this and who will have access to information and how it's going to be accessing this information. So again, I don't want this kind of policy to run over elected officials to do the job that they were elected to do.
I would be very much in favor of looking at what other people do to make sure we're effectively using our time as staff correctly, and if that puts a process in place to request information from elected officials. We're elected officials, but we aren't dictators. And if we look at our charter, we're a city administrator run charter. We trust our city administrator to run our staff, to make sure for all taxpayers that we are running a productive business here, which the city is a business. And of course, we don't want to withhold any information from elected officials or from the public, but there has to be a balance with staff getting things done and processes that are put in place to make sure they're able to do their job they're hired to do. So I am for looking into the processes and procedures and a policy moving forward to make sure the city runs at the optimal ability.
So my recommendation is, again, just to come back to this committee with a framework for a policy that will help regulate this activity. So, we can all be on the same page and agree.
It's
I'm going to move forward.
Sure, and it's very important that we have a methodology to manage the requests of 7 people.
Yeah.
Right? No, everybody has requests, but we have to manage the requests of 7 people and be respectful of staff time in order to provide that responsive government.
And I think we can come up with a way to make sure that we're getting you the information requests in a timely manner, but still not, paralyzing.
Sure, if
departments.
it doesn't come in an efficient way, it doesn't come out in an efficient way.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what we're looking for here is what's the most efficient way to get it in and get it out.
My question is, we've got rules of mayor and council conduct, a resolution that's in place. Does that not meet these needs?
It does, Mayor.
So why aren't we just going by that resolution?
It's just not being followed. So I thought that it would be good to just,
So are you,
energize this conversation and see if we can maybe, utilize that for some framework. But if there's, some tailoring we need to do on that,
well, my suggestion, so as not to create additional staff time, is for us to look at the rules of the mayor and council conduct
Mark it up.
and sign off on it. I mean, we might have some edits to make or things to insert. And of course, we've got to follow the charter. But at the same time, we've got this here. I don't think we need to do something new and different.
I agree. I mean, I think we can take that and capitalize on it. I would also like to come up with a process, for information requests similar to open records requests where it's, we log it, we track it, we provide some accountability, we track the data, we track the staff hours so we know on the back end what we're doing. But right now we receive them by email or by verbal or otherwise, and we're not tracking anything and we're just kind of flying in the breeze on this stuff. So I agree. I think that provides a great framework. I just don't know if everybody's aware of that policy.
Well, and I think we all need to look at that policy, but then at the same time, I do agree with Councilmember Zapata that elected officials need to, if we can't get information, nobody can. And we need to be able to get information.
Absolutely.
So how to best do that, I'm not,
That's what I
I
want to
can't answer that
explore.
question. But,
I think we can find some good solutions.
but no, we need to have, we're making very important decisions. We're conducting business for the city of Roswell, and we need to have all of the information that is possible for us to make those decisions. I don't argue that at all. So keeping that in mind, I think there might be a more efficient way for us to do it than what we're doing now. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, but I think this is the place that we need to hang our hat.
I would agree. I mean, I think having a policy and a process that is fair, that gets information to the elected officials as soon as possible, but that is a process that is fair and is applied to everyone equally is very important and something that you know, in your position as managing the day-to-day activities of the city, can manage and can keep a handle on and track. So, totally agree with you. With us adopting these, but also looking at a specific policy on the flow of information.
So I don't think that any resolution or policy should prohibit any elected official to have access to the relevant information to take decision. Here might be the matter of how we operate to access this information. So maybe one single contact person might be an efficient way to do it because maybe 3 out of 7 elected officials require the same information. So the information has been already produced. It's just a matter of distributing to the elected official who request this kind of information. So in my case, always I channel my request of information through our city administrator, assistant, council assistant. So I'm sure that if any other council members request the same information, it's just a matter of forward. The information has been already produced. So I think having a single channel of access to the information make it more efficient, so the information is not produced at the department level twice. So I think it's more how we're going to operate that if we're going to have access or not to information, and who is going to restrict access to information, and who has the power or not to impeding the access to information. It's just a matter of how are we going to access to this information. And then obviously, every single elected official, I'm sure, have enough judgment to see if the information has to be produced immediately or can wait, and how long can wait this information to obtain. So I'm sure that we all have a good judgment here to see if it's an urgent information or if information can take a few days to be produced. So I think that those are the most important things that we need to address here. It's not that, the resolution or policy that will restrict access to information or dialogue between elected officials and staff. So I think that we should be looking in how we're going to produce efficiently this channel of information.
Okay, so I recommend I just come back with a policy like the last one and we'll keep pushing on it.
Thank you for bringing these two forward.
Further questions or comments?
Yeah. So meanwhile, is the staff still be producing information for elected officials?
Yeah, we're
Meanwhile,
going to get you whatever information you can.
Okay.
We can't, it's going to be based on what you're looking for. I mean, we've
No,
got
it's
to
not.
provide some time to get the information together. And for the most part, if you're requesting basic information, we can get that to you pretty quickly.
Okay. No, I'm just making sure
I
that.
can't think of a case where we haven't been able to turn that around. But if you're going to request information where it's going to take somebody 3 and 4 hours to put it together, then we've got to prioritize that.
No, but my point is,
that may not fit in with
before
the
you
priorities
come out
of
with
that
the
day.
recommendation, still be producing information for elected officials?
Say that one more time?
My question is, before you come out with recommendation how to operate the information channel, will be still producing staff information for elected officials? Yes or no? Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any further questions or comments on that? Thank you. Moving on to finance. Item number 4, overview of the City of Roswell's procurement process. Mr. Luckett, Mr. Anderson.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We understand that we've had a few questions recently about the City of Roswell's procurement process, a few questions about how it works, a few questions about the items that are included in the Mayor and Council agenda packets. So Gary requested that we come before you just to give you an overview of what the basic procurement process looks like, and of course, be able to answer any questions that you might have. I want to introduce our purchasing manager. This is Greg Anderson. He's been with the city for about 2.5 years and has worked with a lot of other local governments in the field of public procurement. So I'm going to turn it over to him, and like I said, we'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Thank you for allowing me to come up and kind of give you an overview of something that is near and dear to me, so sometimes it can get a little boring, but I'll try to keep it moving. So, I just wanted to initially just talk a little bit about best value. That's kind of what I try to use as my guiding star. Buying the best products, buying products and services at the best value possible to serve the taxpayers, whether they ever know it or not. A lot of times when procurement kind of wants to keep out of the newspapers. So we try to do our processes in such a way that that it just rolls through. And by that, I have a project management triangle. If you're familiar with project management, this is kind of a common graphic that you'll see, that in a project you can get quality, cost, or time, and you get to pick two of those, but you can't get all three at once. So best value is seeking that unicorn that's right there in the middle that incorporates all of those elements. So that's kind of what we try to use to bring best value to the city and the citizens. So I wanted to take kind of a 30,000 foot level and look at the procurement process. It all begins with a need, and the departments come in and they define a need, create the business case, and give us a scope. They create that scope. That comes to our department, and we work with the department to try and define the best procurement approach for whatever it is that they want to do. We then take that procurement approach and use that to compete the scope or the specifications, whatever it is that the department brings to us. We go through an evaluation and award process, and then we execute and administer, and hopefully execute and administer the resulting contract, and hopefully learn from that, and then that comes back in and helps the department the next time we need to go out. They can better define and give us a better process, so it's continually improving is what we hope for. So I'm going to walk through a little bit about when we come to that second part there where we define how best to move forward with a project. For professional services, and this is all in our ordinance, this is where these thresholds come from. For professional services, we have a threshold of $25,000. Anything over that threshold is a formal procurement, and it gets awarded by city council. And as a part of that formal procurement, we seek maximum competition, formal advertisement, and formal evaluation process. At less than that threshold, down to $2,500, we go out to three businesses. We seek to try and get 3 offers, and that comes through. The departments do that seeking, and then they put in a requisition, and it comes through our requisitioning process. Purchasing looks, sees that they went out and sought competition, and then we can authorize a purchase order. And that is competition, but it's not formal. It's an informal process. At $2,500 or less, you essentially have a best business judgment. The department can go out and seek someone who they know can produce this in a quality manner, a quality way, but it doesn't have to be competed. They can interact with that on to just one supplier. The savings of competition are outweighed by the cost to compete. So at $2,500 or less, it's just not, you spend more trying to get those quotes to come back than you would make up in the process of the competition. Next, we have a separate threshold for goods and services being anything non-professional. And professional would be if the department says we need a a license or a certification, something that's out there, and we have to have that in order to get the scope of work, then that's considered more of a professional service. So that's where that dichotomy comes in. But for other goods and services and non-professional services, the threshold is $75,000 or more, and that's a formal procurement threshold that as well gets awarded by City Council. And again, we're seeking maximum competition, formal advertisement, formal evaluation. Between $2,500 and $75,000, you again seek 3 written quotes. Above $25,000, the going out and engaging with suppliers, that falls to my department. And still below that, the departments go out and gather in quotes and other competition. So that's a little bit of a difference there. But that competition is still, even if my department does it, isn't formal. It's an informal quote basis. So you still see competition, but not formal. And then finally, at 2,500 or less, the same as in professional services, we use the best business judgment. The department moves forward with that. It's not required to have a PO behind it. Savings of competition are outweighed by the cost to compete again there. So finally, we're going to focus here on the formal procurements, which is what City Council would see for approval. So in a formal procurement, you have a well-defined and thorough process for procuring large dollar goods and services. So when we publish an RFP or an ITB, that essentially provides the framework of how we're going to seek quotes, or how we're going to seek proposals or seek bids. And it essentially lets everyone, including the supplier community, know this is how your bid or your proposal are going to be judged. We are governed by those threshold guidelines I just reviewed. The typical procurement methods there are the invitation to bid, request for proposal, and request for qualifications. And pretty much all of our formal procurements can be housed under one of those methods. So with that, I'll kind of take a deeper dive into the methods. So with an ITB, well, first of all, we'll start, when do you use each one of those? So for an ITB, that's whenever you have a full-scale design and you know exactly what you want. The specifications are available, and you can essentially move forward with that. For an ITB, or excuse me, for an RFP, a request for proposals, you may not know exactly what you want. You can describe what this project looks like, but the full specifications are not available. This a lot of times is for services. This is why for services, things like approach, different methods matter. For an RFQ, really this is somewhat limited to like selection of architects and engineering. That's the most common that you see that with. It's really for whenever you're really focusing in on qualifications. So the award criteria associated with each of those 3 methods, for an ITB, you're seeking the lowest responsive bid from a responsible bidder. So you set up a hurdle. Anyone who can get across that qualifications hurdle, then you're looking for the lowest one that can deliver to you exactly what you set out in your bid documents to provide. You can do that at the lowest cost. For an RFP, you're seeking a responsive proposal from by the highest ranked on the consensus of the evaluation committee. So you look for the highest ranked, and then for an RFQ, you're looking for the responsive qualifications packet that's determined to be the most qualified by the evaluation committee. So those are your general criteria for each of those kinds of procurements. Now, how do we go back to that initial best value? Why is this seeking best value? So with an ITB, the ability to meet specification at the lowest cost is best value. So they do have to be a responsible contractor, but once they get past that, your design documents got everything. So whoever can meet that spec at the lowest cost, that's the best value for the city. For an RFP, you're looking for an optimal combination of cost and other factors. And those are the evaluation criteria. And you move forward with that in as objective a manner as possible, and that is best value. For an RFQ, you're looking for the most quality that your organization can afford. So for that, and that's why in an RFQ, you find whoever is the most qualified, and then you negotiate a cost with that most qualified supplier. And if you can't come to an agreement, in other words, if their costs are just too much, then you can move to the next most qualified supplier. So you're seeking the most quality you can find for what you have in terms of a budget. A recent example of each of these would be the Adult Rec Center driveway connection, the financial advisory services for an RFP, and then the E911 Center design services is an RFQ. And I believe in the, is it provided in that? Yeah, so you have an example of the Adult Rec Center driveway and the financial advisory services procurement memo in your handouts there. And I didn't include an RFQ, but it's essentially, you'd be looking at a lot of the same information from an RFP to an RFQ. So now just again, a bigger look at the council award process. You have the competition. It's summarized in a procurement memo. The department's provided with a procurement memo, and they then can create the agenda item for committee. The agenda item is taken to committee, and then after approval from that, mayor and city council for award. So these are the documents that are created as a part of really any of those three processes. Procurement initiation form, that's where the department helps define the scope, qualifications, all of that comes in as a part of this procurement initiation. You get, when we post to the Georgia Procurement Registry, we get a list of who all's been notified. There's an offer conference in pre-bid, even though those aren't mandatory. You don't have to have one of those, but we typically do. And that produces a sign-in sheet. A lot of suppliers look to that to find out who's interested. And that's posted to the GPR, those sign-in sheets. The RFP itself or invitation to bid and all the addenda, that's all publicly posted as well. The proposals and bids, those come in to us, and those are not posted. Those are just signed in. Those come in for evaluation. We go through, regardless of which one it is, we go through and do a responsiveness determination. And then we look at a responsibility determination. That can sometimes come later on in the process. It's essentially after you've done checking your references, all of those kind of you check references, you go out to see if they're debarred by the state or by the federal government. So that's part of that responsibility determination. The evaluation committee documents, that'd be limited to your RFP. You wouldn't have evaluation committee documents for an ITB. There is a detailed pricing analysis. There are the reference checks, and then those are all summarized in that procurement memo. So if you want to take a look at that, at each of the procurement memos that are in your documentation there, I'll kind of walk through the elements of those. So we have a background and the departmental purpose and authorization to post. There's a posting date and notice information that tells the department when it was posted, how many suppliers received notice. There's some discussion of the offer conference, the pre-bid date and attendance at that offer conference or pre-bid. Then there's term information, that's a length of contract. For a bid, this is sometimes not in the bid just because it's a completion. You go through a project and you come to the completion of that project.
Just to let you know, the procurement memos, those are provided in the presentation packet I just handed out to you, in case you're looking for that.
There is a receipt and evaluation section that talks about the date and number of proposals received, responsiveness and criteria, the recommended firm and cost, and then a short reason for rejection of other proposals, a short discussion of the reasons that the committee selected the proposed contractor, and then an award recommendation. So that's the current procurement memo elements.
So, thanks, Greg. That's a brief overview of procurement and the different processes we have, and just to give you an idea of the thoroughness of each procurement that comes through our office. I did want to give you an idea of just some of the things that we're working on coming up here over the next couple of months. We are putting together some proposed changes to the purchasing ordinance, and you'll see that brought before you in the next month or two. The last time that ordinance was updated was back around 2014, I believe. So we have some ideas and some suggested changes for your consideration. Another item that you'll see in the budget process, we would like to move to an e-procurement solution that would allow us to receive online bids and requests for proposals from suppliers, as well as reach out electronically to the supplier community from the department perspective. We just think we've gone through some demonstrations and think that would really help streamline our process and speed up the evaluation process that we go through today. So with that, we're open for any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very informative information. I had two questions. One is, what are, in addition to our own ordinance, are there legal considerations from the state regarding our procurement process as a municipality and how it's followed?
So our ordinance kind of mirrors the state. The state sets out specific limits, ethical concerns, which we address also in our ethics ordinance, in our purchasing ordinance. But the state kind of says if it's a public works contract over $100,000, you have to follow this procedure. If you're selling property, you have to follow this procedure. So they kind of tell you where you have to do it, and then we follow our ordinance to go along with it.
But basically, a procurement, everything that the city purchases has to go through a process, and a recommendation is made to mayor and council after it's gone through
Over a
a
certain dollar
defined
amount,
process,
yes.
over a certain dollar amount, right,
Yes.
right. And then my second question, sorry, is you mentioned the evaluation committees that are formed. How are those, who are the representatives who are on those committees? And I'm sure it depends on the project. Just wanted some clarification on that.
So what we look for is in that procurement initiation form, the departments can identify the people with the most subject matter expertise. And we typically use those to start a conversation about who and how many people. I like to go either 3 or 5 people on a committee, depending on how many subject matter experts are there. And so that's kind of the process. And there's a conversation back and forth between procurement and the department.
But I think to take a deeper dive into that process, so for example, for the Strategic Plan Evaluation Committee, I was on that, and I think I pulled in Alice, Michael, and Lenore. But that process, even that, we don't talk to each other about the project. I mean, there's a lot of separation in this process to make sure that we're, making sure that we're tracking right with our internal controls. And you'll hear us talk about internal controls a lot with finance, because we need to have these checks and balances in there. So for example, once we create the evaluation team, it's put through a software program where we have to respond through that portal separately. And then we get together at the end and we'll talk through all of the different criteria that, the reasons why we selected one over the other, or why we scored one over the other. So it's a very separate process purposefully. And then in the end, we'll get together and decide on what direction we're going to go in. But I think that's important to note because, I think there's a thought that some of these processes are strictly managed or wrangled by the departments, and that's not the case. I mean, Greg does a procurement memo, and we didn't even see that until he puts that out. So it's a very segmented, separate process, decentralized for a reason. And it's, because of all the corruption and graft that went on for years and years and years in the early part of the century, now we do this. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. I just had a question about the reference checks. As part of the reference checks, are the subcontractors required to do criminal checks on their employees, and do you do financial checks? Is that part of the background check where you check the financial viability of the sub?
A lot of times that can depend on if there's a prior relationship there and how many, like if this is a large corporation, in terms of the general reference checks, the financial, we can request that financial data. It does come into somewhat when we get open records requests. If we request that financial data from someone as a part of the general process, now we have to track that separately because some of that's confidential. And so we typically will do that only if through the rest of the reference checks, we feel like there's a need to go in and check their financial data. And what typically happens is they're a contractor that has a long contracting history with a lot of other local governments, and that's the main thing that we look for. In terms of criminal background checks for subcontractors, I don't think that we don't get into the relationship between our relationship is with that prime contractor, and especially on a construction job, we don't go through and
So let me just, in an example, we would require I'm just asking if we have requirements of our contractors. We wouldn't get into that, but we would ask them to represent to us that they've done background checks, and especially we're such a child-friendly city, and there's child predators that are around. We would want to make sure that those people don't have somebody that is prohibited from working or being within 50 feet of a school, working on one of our projects. So I was just wondering if the city of Roswell had a provision like that where we stated that information, that we expect that you follow those, do that as your organization to do business with us.
On certain examples, we would. So for instance, with our janitorial services, because they're going to be in certain facilities, those individuals, we have to make sure they have past background checks, especially with working in PD. So it really depends on the type of procurement it is, but I'm sure if there were procurement in a situation like you're describing, that would be probably a requirement we could set forth in the RFP. That would
And it's not something that we would monitor. We would basically expect or who we're engaging that they do that for their staff, and they represent to us that they do that, and hopefully they do that.
Any further questions? Thanks, gents. Moving on to item number 5, consideration for the mayor and/or city administrator to execute a task order in an amount not to exceed $35,000 with the city's financial advisory firm, First Tryon Securities, for capital planning services. Mr. Luckett.
Yes, as you might remember, the council approved a contract with our newly selected financial advisory firm, First Tryon Advisors, back in October of 2019. This was kind of structured like an on-call contract. We're only using their services and paying for the services as we use them. The contract was approved an amount not to exceed $75,000 annually. This is the first task order that we're bringing before you, mainly because it's exceeding to the $25,000 threshold. So this is, as Gary mentioned, a request for a task order not to exceed $35,000. Just to kind of walk you through what would be included in this task order. The first item is that they would be, and they actually already are, developing a comprehensive capital planning model for us to utilize to look at all of our capital projects, our major capital projects, ones that would require substantial funding, and to help us determine how those could be funded, various funding structures, timing, the impact on our city resources. That's a one-time fee, and they would help us maintain that, and it would be available for our use in the years to come. This task order also includes a presentation by our financial advisor to the mayor and council at a March 9th budget work session. That's currently what we have planned, basically to talk to you all about funding options for capital projects and all that's available for us to utilize as a city. The other items this includes would basically be all other advice and assistance that we would need as a city leading up to any potential transaction that might come down the road. So this could be a year from now where we might need more scenarios that might help us run in terms of how we would fund this project or that project. If it ended up being, a bond referendum or something like that, this task order would take us all the way up until that bond referendum and help us provide us with the information that we would need, that you all would need to be able to make the decision that you saw fit. It also includes any reimbursement of associated travel or out-of-pocket expenses. We do have funding available in our finance department budget to cover this, and I'm glad to answer any questions you might have.
So to me, this is incredibly important. A couple of days ago, you showed us a 5-year forecast, and that 5-year forecast pretty much had revenues equaling expenses for the most part. And so if we want to accomplish the list of things that our citizens are asking us for, if we want to get ahead of things like sidewalks, right? The only way to do it is to find out what our capital structure could look like, what our capital capacity, thank you very much, our capital capacity might be. So I'm very much in favor of getting started on this. I think it will help us significantly with our strategic planning process, because we could come up with all sorts of great ideas out of a strategic planning process, but if it doesn't work here, we're just, fooling ourselves. So understanding that capital capacity, I think, is very important. So I don't know where everyone else is.
I just have a question, and I think it's very important too. The folks that we invest with, do they have services, or they don't provide any of this? This is outside of the scope of the services where our investments are kept.
Well, yes, this is kind of totally different. This firm specializes in providing financial advisory services. Really, we don't have, that's kind of the next item I'll talk to you about, but we don't have an outside firm that manages our investment portfolio today. So this is the only outside firm that we work with.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's a great idea to know where we are on this aspect. So my question is, you said we approved already a budget of what, 70,000? Or
You approved a contract up to $75,000, but the budget may or may not necessarily be there. So we've had the funding to fund this task order in our finance department budget. If we were to need $75,000, then we would have to come back to council because we wouldn't have those funds readily available.
so this will take 50% of what council approve.
This task order would use roughly 50% of the contract capacity.
Okay. So then, okay, there was this inside the scope of service contracted with them? Okay,
Yes, that was one of the primary tasks that they would be tasked with.
great, thank you.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion approved by Councilmember Tyler, second by Councilmember Zapata. Any further questions or comments? All in favor, please raise your hands. Unanimous, thank you. Moving on to item number 6, discussion of procuring investment advisory services to assist the finance department in the management of the city's investment portfolio. Mr. Luck.
Thank you. This is something new that I've been considering for quite some time and wanted to bring it forward to the mayor and council just to get some guidance on your perspective. Basically, I would like to move forward with procuring investment advisory services.
Maybe the opening.
To my knowledge, this hasn't been done in the city of Roswell in the past, but I think it's important, mainly for a couple of reasons. As you might remember when we discussed this, when we presented the investment report to you all a couple of months ago, so we manage an investment portfolio of about $117 million today. That consists of all of our bank deposits and any of our other investment tools that we're able to utilize in accordance with our city investment policy and state law. So before we went forward with procuring and going out for an RFP, I wanted to make sure that you all were in favor of us moving in that direction. If you are in agreement with that, obviously we would go through a full RFP process to find the most qualified investment firm out there. But just to give you some other information about what this looks like, really for me, there's 3 primary reasons that we want to do this. Ability to access that outside expertise. Today, that expertise doesn't really exist very much within our finance department. That duty really falls to me. So I'm the one that is responsible for all of our investment activities. With procuring outside services, that would give us that ability to have someone devoting their full attention to managing and our investment portfolio. And by doing that, then it would allow our staff to be able to focus on other priorities that we're not able to get to today, because obviously this is a very important task, and we want to make sure that we're doing a good job with it. Some of the benefits, and this is in some of the GFOA material that we provided, but some of the benefits of having an outside investment advisory services, because you were hiring someone with that level of expertise, you would expect an enhanced portfolio return. Obviously, that would be confined to what we are able to invest in terms of our city investment policy and state law. Better management of risk. You get access to that sound investment advice. They also have access to technology that we can't use today, that we don't have access to help make those kinds of decisions. Some of the characteristics of what this would look like. Obviously, the investment advisor would act in the city's best interest. They are regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. One of the areas that would be a decision for us and for the mayor and council would be what approach we would use, discretionary versus non-discretionary. And what we mean by that is a discretionary approach would be that the investment advisor has the ability to execute transactions basically on their own. Non-discretionary would mean they would have to get our approval every time. Because this is something new, I would only be pursuing the non-discretionary approach, and that would be my goal in procuring these services. Also, just to point out, all cash and all securities, those would continue to be held by the city. The actual investment advisor doesn't hold any asset that belongs to the city. The city would be the only one that can actually initiate cash transactions. So they would make the recommendation on what we would buy or sell, but it would be up to the city to actually initiate that. And they would also be required to use competitive bidding. So we would make sure that they would be looking for the best deal for the city. I did look around and look at what other jurisdictions currently utilize outside investment advisors. In terms of our immediate area, the city of Alpharetta does have a outside investment advisor to help manage some of their funds. Other areas I've seen, several counties, Athens, Clarke County, the city of Gainesville, the city of LaGrange, Macon-Bibb County. Those all are just some examples. I think the Cobb Water Authority, all of those use those services today. So we would be recommending to move forward with procuring investment advisory services. Just based on what I've read, the annual cost could be estimated between $20,000 and $30,000 a year, but that depends upon the size of the portfolio that they would actually manage. And it doesn't necessarily mean they would manage our entire portfolio. We may only give them a portion of the portfolio to manage. In terms of funding, I would recommend that we would fund this through interest revenues that we're earning today off of this. And the hope would be that with having an outside investment advisor, those would continue to grow and it would pay for itself. So like I mentioned, we're here really just to request guidance before we would move forward on this.
Floor's open.
Ryan, the fact that you've been managing a $117 million portfolio to me is amazing. But as we grow as a city, as money moves through here the way it will as we grow towards 100,000 people, I think it's high time to do this, and I think it'll take a lot of stress certainly off you. I also like the fact that it's now kind of a segregation of duties going on, right? So if, God forbid, something should happen to you, they're still out there being managed.
Exactly.
So I think all that, from a succession planning standpoint, et cetera, is very good, and I'm very supportive, so thank you.
Ryan, I'd like to thank you as well, and the finance department, because there have been those that came before you. And I praise you because the returns on our investments have always exceeded expectations. And so you all have done a great job, and thank you so much. I do agree with Councilmember Tizer that going for outside expertise is always a good idea, especially when it frees up some of your time. And if I were you, I wouldn't want $117 million resting on my shoulders. But thank you for having done it. But I'm fully supportive of going to outside for help with that.
So I have a question. What kind of investment advisory service reputable firm can we get for $20,000 to $30,000 annually? So we don't get into the mom and pop local advisor. So do we have an idea of what kind of reputable firms are we talking about for $20,000 to $30,000 annually?
Well, and that's really just an estimate. So what we would do would be to, we would first, through our procurement process, look at their technical qualifications and then look at the price they offer. And, based on how we weight those evaluation criteria, that would lead us to who we think is the most qualified. So through our procurement process, we would set the criteria for, a certain level of qualifications. This is the scope of work that we expect. We would obviously want them to have plenty of experience. And so all that would be evaluated through the procurement. $20,000 to $30,000 is just an estimate, but it could be less, it could be more. I'm expecting that range. But really, we won't know until we get the proposals back and see how the costs came out.
So do you think that, according with your research, we can get one of the top 10 in the country for $20,000 to $30,000 to manage all our investments?
Yes, it depends on like I said, it depends on the size of the portfolio too. So if we give them the entire portfolio to manage, it's probably going to be more than that. But my thought would be kind of to start with a small amount and let them, and just to make sure we're comfortable with the process and how it's working. So I think definitely $20,000 to $30,000 can handle that.
And this contract, you visualize like annual contract and review if the return is higher than the one that you were able to obtain through all these years, and will be tied to performance to evaluate. And we don't want to pay 20, 30 and come with a less return than you. Better give you a bonus, but for less than that. So,
well, definitely. I mean, there would be reporting involved, and we would obviously part of that is setting benchmarks. So we would want to make sure in terms of our contract that we're setting benchmarks for their performance. So obviously we couldn't hold them to that if the market were to crash tomorrow. But we set the benchmarks, and that's one way that we help judge whether or not they're doing a good job for us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Carrie, what do you need from us?
If there's a consensus, then we would just for the procurement and bring that back to you when it's finished.
Charge.
Okay. Thank you.
Moving on to item number 7, presentation of the fiscal year 2020 second quarter budget report. Mr. Lucky.
So I think this is a record for us, the number of items we brought forward in one time, but so this is our second quarter budget report, and as we did with our investment report last time, we want to begin bringing these to you on a quarterly basis. These items are always in your packet and your information items, but we want to actually present them to you on a quarterly basis. So this is our budget report that takes us through December of 2019. I'll try and walk through this as quickly as possible, but the first couple of pages is really just a memo to kind of give you in writing an overview of how each of our funds is performing. If you turn to page 5 and 6 of the report, this is where I'll spend just a couple of minutes because this is talking about the general fund and how we're performing with our revenues and expenses. On page 5 of the report, you can see at the top 2 boxes there, this gives you an idea. Our revenue budget for FY 2020 was $77.6 million. If you look inside that circle there, you see that projected year to date, we expected to bring in $50.3 million. We brought in $52.8 million, so we are ahead of our projections. The box on the right gives you our expenditure budget. So our expenditure approved budget is $86.1 million. Projected amount to be spent to date, $38.9. So far, we've spent about $36.4 million. The middle section of this page gives you an idea of how we've done just for the month of December. And those bottom 2 boxes also just a graphical representation of what I just talked about. On page 6, this gives you a little more detail and a deeper dive into our revenues and expenses. So the very top table there gives you our revenues. So you see our projected amount through December is the $50.3 million. We've collected $52.8. So we're $2.5 million above our projections. That's primarily from our property taxes, as well as our business taxes and our licenses and permits. Just to give you some background, our property taxes, and we talked back when the millage rate was adopted by council, that we were expecting about $1 million more than what we had estimated in the budget process. Another piece of that is the title ad valorem tax funds that we collect. The law for that changed back in July, so we are actually seeing quite a bit more than we have seen in the past. And that was a little unexpected because that law has changed so many times, and the calculation for it is a little bit on the crazy side. But so that's some positive news. On our expenditures in the general fund, you can see we've spent $36.3 million through December. Gives us a positive variance of about $2.5 million. Most of that is in our salaries and benefits through vacancy savings. That's primarily in our police and fire departments is where you see those vacancy savings exist. And then it gives you the bottom table at the bottom of page 6 by department, how each department has spent up through December. I'll move through these next pages relatively quickly, but the next page is our water and sewer funds. Our revenues are slightly above our projections. Our expenditures are within our projected expenditure amounts. The next page is our solid waste fund. Same story here. Our revenues are slightly ahead of our projected revenues, and our spending is within our projected amounts. Page 9 is our stormwater fund. Again, our revenues here are a little less than what we projected at this point in the year. Our spending in this fund is also within our projected amounts. The next page is our recreation participation fund. Here again, our revenues have exceeded our projections, and our expenditures are right in line with what we had projected through this point in the year. Page 11 is our hotel motel fund. This fund, our revenues aren't performing quite as well as we had hoped here, but there's still time, and we're going to continue to monitor this, of course. One of the things that we're hoping will help us gain some ground, we have 2 new hotels opening one in late February and one in late March. And so hopefully that will help us catch up here with our revenues in this fund. But our projections for expenditures, those are right in line. In speaking with the CVB, just a few things are going on here that have contributed to this. They're seeing a decrease in demand. They also saw about 1,000 hotel rooms that recently reopened around the perimeter area that they think is contributing to some of the lack of demand here in the Roswell area. So that's had an effect on our revenues, hotel motel revenues. Page 12 is our E911 fund. Our revenues here have exceeded our projections, and our spending is right in line with our projections through this point in the fiscal year. And then the final page, so those were just kind of the major funds, but this final page gives you a complete listing of all of our funds and how those have performed with both revenues and expenditures up to this point in the fiscal year. And then the final section of our report is a capital project list by department. So if you were interested in seeing what the budget is, spending, what's available for each of these individual projects, all of that is there. Just to give you a quick summary, so as of today, we have about $75.8 million in approved capital project funds. Through December, the departments have spent about $9.3 million. $18.5 million of that is encumbered, so it's ready to be spent, and about $47.9 million is available for those projects, but hasn't been spent. And most of that is some of the big ticket items like Big Creek Parkway that are continuing to move forward and will be ramping up over the next year or so. That's our budget report, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Floor is open.
Yes.
Hotel motel fund and probably the others, what happens when our revenues are below budget? What happens on the expenditure side? Are they, did we have to cut expenses to match that, or did the funds come from somewhere else because we committed those funds previously?
Right.
Can you explain how that works, please?
Particularly for the hotel motel fund, we try to be as conservative as we can when it comes to the revenues and expenses. So if something happens where the revenues are slightly off, we may not collect as much revenue as we anticipated, but we have available fund balance that will help offset the expenditures that are there. If there's an instance where we need to cut expenditures, then we would definitely bring that forward to the mayor and council for consideration. So far, we really haven't had that instance, and particularly with the general fund, it's large enough that we have revenues that may fall short of projections, but then we have other revenues that are exceeding projections, and that helps offset and still fund the operations that we need to fund.
So for the hotel motel fund, we would pull money from the general fund to help shore them up?
Not necessarily. So with that, the hotel motel fund has some fund balance, and so if the revenues don't come in as expected, that fund balance the fund would not go negative essentially, because that fund balance is there to help offset or cushion if revenues were not to come in as expected. So.
And the other, I know there's some specific, like the stormwater fund that has its own revenue and expenses.
Yes, and so same there with those departments. These are kind of different than the hotel motel fund because the departments are managing the expenses there. So if revenues were not coming in where they needed to be, we would also be working with the departments to say we need to scale back on our spending. That may not necessarily have to come to council to have a formal budget change, but we would make sure that the expenditures are within the revenues that are coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I want a clarification regarding the hotel fund. You said that it's other funds, so it won't be negative. But I understand that these other funds could be used for other projects as well, like trails and maybe maintenance of historic homes or other usage allowed by law. Mm-hmm. So this means that, answering the question, that if we had to pull, if they were short the funds and we need to pull to cover a fixed cost, then we need to take or pull from other possible projects that we can use these funds. So I just want to clarify this, and maybe if you want to add anything on that?
Sure. I mean, with the fund balance that we have, that fund balance is, either is dedicated for some use because of this particular fund. And so we would have to make sure that, what the funds that would be covering, if there ends up being a shortfall, that it's a valid use of those funds.
Any further questions or comments?
I'd like to make a comment, and just to kind of piggyback on what you were talking about. When we're talking about the Hotel Motel Fund, our Convention and Visitors Bureau submits a budget to us every year. And we, under our MOU, commit to that budget. So, for example, in the previous year, our revenues did not meet the budget request, and we had to augment that with general fund dollars. Now, we are revising our MOU with the CBB to state that their budget cannot exceed revenues, which will save us from doing that in the future. So I just wanted to clarify that because you were talking about big picture.
And I also, looking big picture, I know we have several hotels looking to come online with the elements that we talked about and some others. Do you have projections of what those are going to bring?
The revenue?
Yes.
Yes. So this particular fiscal year, I think we estimated about $100,000. But for a full year of those hotels being online, depending upon the size of those, it was about $200,000 to $300,000 annually that each hotel would bring. So it'll be a significant
So the
bump.
future has a lot of promise.
It does, exactly.
And then also we increased the hotel motel tax from 6% to 8%. So
Right.
that helps.
And a certain amount of that is required to go to CBB versus other areas. So as the tax revenue increases, the amount they get increases also, even if it's over their budget, even if it's in addition to the budgeted revenues.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Moving on to Recreation and Parks, item number 8, consideration to approve a memorandum of understanding between the City of Roswell and the Roswell Soccer Club. Mr. Leatherman and Malone.
Mr. Malone's taking this one on. Good evening. This item was presented to our department in the summer of 2019 by the Roswell Soccer Club. The Roswell Soccer Club is a volunteer booster association through the Recreation Commission. To give you a little bit of background of our timeline for this project, it began last October where we presented the project proposal and timeline to the Recreation Commission and moved forward with what we consider to be 2 public input meetings, one that was directly geared towards approaching the local community that would be surrounding this project, as well as another November 12th public input meeting that actually was open to the whole general public. We had one participant between those 2 meetings that came out and expressed some opinions regarding this potential project. This project as a whole, I'm sorry, I should have touched on that, is actually to fund the lighting of our Grimes Bridge soccer field. So the Roswell Soccer Club came to us. They wanted to fund the installation of these athletic field lights for those 2 fields, which is adjacent to the adult recreation center at Grimes Bridge soccer fields. I apologize, I should have touched on that. So after those 2 public input meetings, we actually came back and created an MOU for the between the City of Roswell and the Roswell Soccer Club. To give you a little more background of why they presented this project to us, this is a program growth graph of what we're looking at. The reason I put that in there right now is the key figure that we're looking at is actually the one on the bottom, which is the increase in our wait-listed participants over the last 8 years. As you can see, the wait-listed participants for our soccer program has significantly increased. Now, what that means when they're on the wait list is we are unable to get those participants into our programs
primarily because we don't have the practice space and field capacity to take them on. We are basically at full capacity when it comes to practice facilities for the soccer program. So that's key in why this project came about and was presented to us last summer. Some of the other strategic master plans that this covers, this is part of our 5-year strategic plan, but adding complementary training spaces and facilities for athletics was listed as one of our Tier 1 recommendations. Programs for teens was also rated as the #1 area of importance for overall program satisfaction. And this field specifically, which again is the Grimes Bridge soccer fields, are specifically designed for our teen age groups. So the addition of these lit fields would accomplish both of the goals in our strategic master plan, as well as allow for us to get more participants into the program overall. The proposed project includes new LED lighting. These would actually be the first athletic field LED lights that we have in our amongst the fields that we have. They're lower cost to operate, longer bulb life. This project would come with a warranty with it, obviously, and it also offers what's called the Control Link module. That actually allows for us to control the lights from off-site, reduce the overall staffing costs associated with turning them on and off, and then also provides an automated scheduling system, which actually allows for some of our volunteer coaches to maybe have access to that with some restrictions associated with it. So, this is a conceptual glare impact that we've done, basically what the light spillage would be from those new lights on that field. There are 2 fields that sit there, the red being the most extreme as far as the glare impact is concerned, all the way out, and you'll see as it goes to the green. The green and anything outside of that would be the equivalent of looking at a 60-watt light bulb. So as you can tell from this diagram, that's Grimes Bridge Road that runs along the south of that picture. The glare impact would actually not cross Grimes Bridge Road, which is where a lot of our primary residents are across that street. The project funding, as I mentioned, is going to come specifically from the Roswell Soccer Club. They will fund the initial design and installation. The approximate costs that we're looking at, obviously not knowing all of that associated with it yet, is about $325,000 to about $350,000. After the lights have been installed, the city would be responsible for the utility and maintenance cost after installation. The recommendation from staff at this point would be to move this item forward to the next available mayor and council meeting for your approval.
Floor is open.
Just one question, Director Leatherman. I remember talking about this at some meetings some time ago. How did the neighborhood meetings come out?
So we did a neighborhood meeting specifically with an invitation, as you saw in the glare impact map. We looked at that map originally and then invited specifically the neighborhoods surrounding this park. And we did that by direct mail to those houses, inviting them to the meeting, also giving them Stephen's contact information if they weren't able to attend the meeting. And that's where we had the one individual community member show up for that meeting to gather information. Her comments really surrounded actually not necessarily directly this project, but also the field that already has lights kind of more at the top. You can see at the very top of the screen there. And was excited generally just about the new technology and the glare impact that we can direct with the LED lights. And those were her main comments surrounding this project. And then the second meeting that we had, we did a public invitation through social media and our planning site and didn't have anybody other than our direct stakeholders and staff come to that meeting.
About how many households live in that, or how many households are in that area roughly, do we know?
Do you remember how many?
We sent out a mailing to roughly 50, 60 residents surrounding off Grimes Bridge Road, as well as the residential community and neighborhood that actually is
So about 60?
It was about 60.
Kind of these homes here, these along this side, and then this neighborhood and this street. And I can't remember the name of the street that's right up here on the back.
Is it Meadowwood? Meadowwood?
Sounds right.
Oh, so you went all the way out?
Yeah, essentially. So there's right back here on the back side of the park, there's a street right back in here that ends in a cul-de-sac. So we sent mailers to this group and then across Grimes Bridge and then these homes down Oxbow. There's a cluster of about 3 homes here and 1 here and 1 down here.
So, quick question here. What would be the length of the MOU? Length?
So the MOU would be just for the installation. So the MOU would expire after the installation of the lights, because then at that point, they're installed, they're on city property, and then we take on the responsibility of maintenance and utilities.
So, so is this investment will impact any fees that they will charge to the player, to any registration fees or any fees that the kids have to pay today?
No.
Okay.
So, haven't been Parks and Rec for a month now.
From the project, or just lose the ability to complete it?
Timeline for the project will have to be completed by a certain day, or do you know anything about
So
that?
we're waiting for the MOU to move through mayor and council before we do the direct assessment on the property. So we have a couple of soil borings that we need to do to understand what the engineering requirements are going to be for the lights themselves, and that'll help direct the actual timeline for construction. But rightly, Roswell Soccer Club didn't want to move forward with that investment. It's about $8,000 until they had confidence that they could move forward with the entirety of the project.
So we have a motion to move forward by Councilmember Judy.
Second.
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 Second by Councilmember Tizer. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Unanimous, thank you. Thanks, gents. Moving on to other items, item number 9, committee member, Councilmember Zapata, consideration to mandate the inclusion of all requirements in the agenda packet for all procurements requiring mayor and council approval. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you. So, yeah, we have a great introduction when we went through the procurement process. It's crystal clear that we have a good legal procurement process. So this is taking, we finished the understanding the procurement process, and now we're going to discuss is moving forward from this point to the regular mayor and council meetings where we have, when we have to vote on the project. So consideration to mandate the inclusion of the requirements in the agenda packet for all procurement requiring mayor and council approval by voting mayor and council regular meetings. So, I've been noticing throughout these years that sometimes come more complete information about the requirements and the vendors, and sometimes it's more incomplete. And recently, unfortunately, we have a case very recently about the recreation service contract that we just voted on, and the packet information came with incomplete information, which was kind of confusing, and not only the public opinion but also the media, who on Friday, January 17, wrote an article here on the paper with the information. I understand the reporter here, Mr. David Ibata, that he took this information from the packet. So when you have incomplete information on the packet, you not only make it harder to make a decision to elected official, but also you can confuse the public opinion and the press. So, thinking about that, I have identifying the problem, I have a solution, which is to have a matrix. Every time that mayor have to vote on a service, acquiring a service for a product, to have a matrix where you have the critical requirements for the project or the service or the product, and who are the vendors who participate on the procurement process. So then easily you can identify who are all these vendors and who are all these, which requirements have been taken into consideration. And also, we just talked about the evaluation committee, 3 to 5 members in the committee that we don't know at the time of voting who were those members of the committee. So what I'm proposing here is when come in front of mayor and council to vote in procurement, to have complete information on the packet, not only for mayor and council best decision right there, but also to inform the public about the main requirements for the project. So, just to give an example, on the last one we were talking about on this recreation service contract, we were talking about concession fees, length of the contract, references, and then maybe experience or knowledge of the companies who were participating on the process. So came to my attention that I don't know if you remember, but on the packet was missing the length of the contract. So it was clarified during the meeting, but was not part of the packet. And so that was, and then one of the concession fees was saying half of the story. The concession fee was not telling both of them moving forward how much they were offering, was just showing one moving forward how much we'll offer in concession fee, and the other one was showing how much used to be offered on the concession fee. So it was kind of confusing. We have a conversation at the council at the moment, but to clarify this. So, in order to avoid moving forward with this kind of incomplete information, I will propose to have a matrix that highlights the requirements which was taken in consideration for the evaluation and decision, and who were the vendors who at the time participated on the process. So that is what I'm proposing here tonight.
So at our next meeting or between now and then, can you bring us an example of that matrix?
Yeah, he's there on the packet, on the page
I looked for it.
55. Page 50, on page 9, oh no, it's item number 9, page 55.
Because I was looking for it, I can't.
Have been an update? I have it.
Item number 9.
Yeah, item number 9.
Just a moment here.
You have to renumber.
Yeah.
When we add things, it changes the numbering of the
Yeah,
page.
sorry.
No problem. But it's item number 9 still.
Right.
Right there.
So, it's a very simple matrix that gives you a big snapshot of the situation of all the requirements on the vendors. So very simple, nothing too complicated, no information that the evaluation committee have not been talking about and writing about, and nothing that our procurement department, nothing that they don't have already on record for every single procurement, like it was described before.
Thank you, Willie. So would you propose that being part of this procurement memo?
Right. So yeah, I'm proposing to be there on the packet. From every department, whoever department is bringing forward to mayor and council approval, they have to include this matrix on the packet. So we give us immediate understanding of the whole process and how was the final recommendation made.
If I could comment, Mr. Palmer, if you would help me with this, because I know that I have, in the past, I have seen matrices in this process before. And I think, and I don't want to speak for Councilmember Zapata, but I think there's maybe perhaps a lack of consistency in the information that's provided. And I think that information should be very consistent and robust. Of course, I don't want to step over the process itself, and I understand that we as electeds have to be very careful in the procurement process. because we should not personally be influencing the outcome of that. However, I do agree that there needs to be consistency and robust information provided. And I'm not sure if that is in a matrix or what that looks like, but, we've got a guy back here that is knee-deep in procurement. So perhaps we could just get something that would serve our needs and they can convey information to us.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that is my point, exactly what Mayor just said, and to be consistent and robust information at the time of regular meeting. I understand that before you cannot present this information, might be some legal issues, but at the time of mayor and council vote, then all this information is public. So that is what I'm proposing.
I concur.
I would agree with that too. I mean, I think having some just consistent matrix that could be included in the packet is a good idea.
Is the committee, the council cool with me getting with Ryan and talking that through and then providing back to you all what that looks like on our end? And
I
then
would
we can just
support
kinda-
that completely.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Moving on to item number 10, consideration to have regular recreation commission meetings at City Hall. Councilmember Spata.
So, I noticed that all the board and commission who hold regular meetings, out of 5, 4 are held here at City Hall. So then, I like consistency. I like, standardization, and because when especially for the public that they is used to come to City Hall to all these 4 board and commission meetings and mayor and council regular meetings, besides work sessions and committee meetings. So and also we recently make a huge investment into the audio system, state-of-the-art audio system that is working very, very well, and we can definitely get utilized even more the big investment we made. So based on that is what I want to bring here for discussion. Well, I say agenda vote. Well, I was thinking more discussion, but I guess it was a misunderstanding. I will propose discussion, no agenda vote. To see what you think to have all our board and commissions meetings at City Hall and be consistent with the others and get the public, the sense that all board and commissions that they want to attend, they are holding here, so they don't have to be guessing where to go and the time where to be held.
Mayor, since you know the background of this, I'll let you.
Okay, well, let me interject. We've got 5 minutes. We've got a hard stop at 7. Let me say several things. Number one, the Rec Commission is a state authority. The DDA is a state authority. The Housing Authority is a state authority. And we, the city of Roswell, do not regulate those authorities. We hate to use the phrase, but we don't have the authority to regulate the authorities. And going beyond that, we don't require it with the DDA, we can't. We don't require it with the Housing Authority, we cannot. We don't require it with the Rec Commission, we cannot. But having said that, the Rec Commission is in the Adult Rec Center, which is the most highly used facility in the city of Roswell. It's centrally located. They do have good attendance. They advertise these meetings. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a process that's not broken. And I would not support even attempting to regulate the Rec Commission or the DDA or the Housing Authority. I think that's outside of our purview.
I agree, and talking to the Rec Commission, they are very happy where they are doing business. They do record all the meetings. They're as transparent as any other commission, and so I would motion to deny this.
There is no vote. It's a discussion. So yeah, and also, let's keep in mind that they manage, they have a budget, and they are responsible to all the policy for Parks and Rec in the city of Roswell. So
They're
to
responsible for
inform to-
policy, we set their budget.
Right.
And we are responsible for their budget,
Right,
as we are with many other state
correct.
authorities that we cannot regulate. So he said this is a discussion item only. Do you not want to vote on this? Because I would, okay, I'd make a motion to deny. So.
Motion denied by the mayor, second by Councilmember Judy. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands.
I abstain because my intention was not a vote, so.
Okay, so 5 approved, 1 abstention.
I'd like to put it to bed.
We are adjourned.